And so now we begin Chapter 2 in the second lesson of our course. In this chapter, we are going to be comparing economic systems around the world. We are going to look at what an economic system is and how it helps countries and societies achieve their economic goals, and how systems always affect people and their lives. No matter what kind of a system you live under, you are always living under an economic system, no matter what part of the world you live under, and that will affect your daily life in many, many ways. And so we'll see exactly how that occurs in this chapter. So we begin with the fourth module. The key idea that we will study in this module is that every society must determine how to use its scarce resources to achieve its economic goals. Every society has economic goals, and we'll look at 5 of those major goals in this module. But we will also come back to the idea of scarcity, and that choices must always be made because everything is scarce, and when a society determines how to use its scarce resources, it must make choices and even trade-offs when achieving its economic goals. So there are 3 questions that we will look at. First, what are the 3 basic economic questions that every society has to answer? Secondly, what are the 5 economic goals that societies pursue? And finally, we will look at how societies have to make trade-offs among those 5 goals, that they can't achieve all of them to their maximum capacity. Now, as we start, remember that all resources, all land, all labor, all capital, everything that we need to make all the goods and services to meet our wants and needs are ultimately scarce and limited. So because of that, we always must make trade-offs. We always have to give up something to get more of something else. And therefore, choices have to be made, and what we give up is the opportunity cost of our decision. So you're deciding, do you want to sleep in, or do you want to come to class on time? Do you want to buy a big hamburger, or do you want to buy a slice of pizza? Do you choose college after high school, or do you choose to work after high school? All of those are choices that must be made because of scarcity, and they all have consequences. So let's begin by looking at the 3 basic economic questions. Every society on Earth must decide how it is going to use its scarce resources to meet wants and needs. And as a result of that, there are 3 fundamental basic economic questions that every society has to answer. And different societies come up with different answers to these questions. The first question is, what goods and services should be produced with the scarce resources that we have? Now, in the United States, what should be produced is actually determined by the intersection of the law of demand and the law of supply in what we call a market, because we have a market economy. That is how what is produced is determined in our country and in many countries around the world, but not every country determines it that way. The second question every society must answer is, how should it be produced? Should we use more labor? Should we employ more workers and produce things by hand? Or should we use more technology, more machines, more robots? And again, there are trade-offs to be had when we determine how we're going to make something. Now, the method that we choose, whether to use more manual labor or to use more machines, often depends on the profit motive, particularly in the United States. Which is cheaper? Is it cheaper to use man-made labor, or is it cheaper to use robots and machines to produce goods and services? What are the costs of production? Oftentimes, that is the determining factor in determining how a good is actually produced. The third question that every society must answer is, for whom should it be produced? Who is the market that will demand and supply the good? How will the exchange be made? How will payment be received? Who's going to get what we produce? Should everyone receive an equal amount of something, or should some people have more and other people have less? And if so, how do we determine who gets more? Is it because someone is smarter, more talented, more experienced, stronger? Is it because they have more talent and skill and ability? How do we determine that? Or do we say that people have a certain basic entitlement to certain goods and services? Those are highly controversial and debatable questions, and people have very different views on how this question should be answered. And as a result of that, this is one of the most heated questions that we debate in our society. The second thing that we are going to look at is a society's economic goals. Every society has economic goals. And these goals match up with a society's desire to increase its standard of living. The standard of living of a society is a way we measure the comfort level of society in terms of the goods and services available. In other words, if goods and services are relatively plentiful and available, and many people in that society can have most all of their needs met, and even many of their wants met, then we say that that society is enjoying a high standard of living. But if it's a country where people are relatively poor, and many people don't even have their basic needs for food, clothing, and shelter met, let alone getting many of their wants met, then we say that the country enjoys, or not enjoys rather, but is living with a relatively low standard of living. And so a standard of living is a measure of the comfort level of a society in terms of the goods and services available to the mass population. And some countries have high standards of living, like the United States. Other countries, like Zimbabwe in Africa, have very low standards of living. But all societies try to increase their standard of living by achieving economic goals. These are 5 economic goals that societies generally share. The first is economic growth. Societies want to grow over time. Economic growth is generally measured using GDP, gross domestic product. And it's a measure of the total amount of all goods and services that are produced in our country in a given year. Now, if we are increasing the amount of goods and services we are producing faster than the population is growing, then that means the size of the pie is growing, and there are more and more goods and services available to be divided up amongst the population, so everyone can get more, and everyone can enjoy a higher standard of living. But if population is growing faster than the economy is growing, in other words, population is growing at a faster rate than the rate at which we are increasing our production of goods and services, then we have a pie that has to be divided up against a greater number of people, which means there are fewer goods and services to go around for each person, and the standard of living will decline. So one goal that societies have is to achieve economic growth. The second goal that societies have is efficiency. Now, efficiency means producing the highest quantity of goods and service possible using the fewest resources. Because the fewer resources we use to produce each good or service, the more resources we have available to produce other goods and services. So we generally want efficiency. There are 2 kinds of efficiency. One kind of efficiency is called allocative efficiency. If we are being allocatively efficient, what it means is that we are producing the quantity of goods and services and the mix of goods and services that society wants. In other words, we're producing the right number of cars, the right number of homes, the right number of iPhones, the right number of fighter jets, the right amount of education that society generally wants. If we are being productively efficient, it means that we are producing those goods and services using the cheapest cost, the lowest opportunity cost, or using the fewest resources possible. So societies seek efficiency. But we also seek equity in many cases. Equity concerns the distribution of goods and services. Now, there are 2 different kinds of equity. Most people in this country believe in equality of opportunity, meaning that every person is entitled to have an equal chance or an equal opportunity to achieve their goals and to achieve economic success if they choose to apply themselves, become educated, work hard, and acquire skills and talent that will lead to higher wages and income. But some people also believe in equality of outcome, and that is much more controversial, much more debatable. Equality of outcome means that when we produce goods and services, people get more or less the same amount, or we at least give people more goods and services than the economy might entitle them to in a market economy. That's more debatable, and that involves redistribution of income, taking income away from people that have earned higher income and redistributing or giving it to other people that earn less income in the form of maybe welfare checks, food stamps, health care, unemployment insurance, workers' compensation, and things like that. Equity is a much more controversial economic goal. Not so much equality of opportunity, but equality of outcome. Societies also seek economic security for their citizens. Economic security can be both private and public. Economic security means that people believe that their wages are high enough that they can afford to live a comfortable life, and that they are not in great danger of losing their job. That's economic security, and that jobs are widely available, so that if you do lose your job, it will be relatively easy to find a new one. Societies that don't have as much economic security oftentimes find jobs hard to come by. So if you lose a job, it's hard to get a new one, or people are fearful of losing the job that they have, or wages are relatively stagnant. Public economic security means providing a social safety net for people who are maybe having a low income or they don't have an income. And so we may provide them with health care. We may provide them with food stamps. We may provide them with subsidies for housing. We may provide them with child care services. We might provide them with some other things, unemployment insurance or workers' compensation. These are all programs that have been designed by the United States government to provide a safety net, not to provide an abundance for people that are out of work or of low income, but to provide a minimal standard of living so that they are not homeless and they are not completely economically insecure. And then finally, most societies desire economic freedom, meaning that the individual citizens have free choices for their careers and as a consumer. So when you go into the store, no one tells you what to buy. You make a choice of what to buy with the income that you have. Or that people will have the choice on what career they want to pursue and what jobs they want to take. And so economic freedom gives businesses and individuals the freedom to make the choices that they want. But oftentimes, there are trade-offs between these goals. Remember, there is scarcity. Even in achieving these economic goals, there is scarcity. And so choices and trade-offs have to be made. And so when we want to achieve a higher level of one goal, usually it's at the cost of giving up some of another goal. Trade-offs force societies to prioritize among economic goals. What's more important to us, having more efficiency or having more equity? Having more economic security or having more economic freedom? And so oftentimes to have more of one, we have to give up some of the other, and we debate these. Economically and in political debates, as a society, we are constantly debating these goals and which ones we should have more of and what we should give up to get them. And oftentimes, it is dependent on what your values are, what you consider worthwhile, the way you view the world. What is your definition of a good or adequate standard of living? When the gains from change exceed the losses, it is possible to achieve an improved standard of living without neglecting the goals of equity and economic security, but only when that happens. Only if we gain more from our change than we lose. And so, we have these questions. Does the definition of a good or adequate standard of living change with your age or with your circumstances in life? How do scarcity and the need to make trade-offs affect your answer? How does this compare to other nations? All of those things are important. And so, in this module, we've reviewed several things. We've learned that every society must answer 3 basic economic questions, that all societies have 5 major goals that are economic in nature that they try to pursue, but that when they try to pursue these goals, in trying to maximize them, to get more of one goal, you have to make a choice or trade-off and have less of another goal. And so, once again, we see the rule of scarcity and trade-offs at work.